Hello, everyone. Welcome tonight to the Poetry Center at San Francisco State University. I am Steve Dickison, and I'm director of the Poetry Center, and I'll be your online host tonight. And for this event on poetry and the environment. And like to begin by making a land acknowledgement, and I want to acknowledge that San Francisco State, which is where the Poetry Center is housed, and also where my home is, and a number of the homes of several people here, we are living on unceded Ohlone land. And my experience since living in the Bay Area is that I've known of the Ohlone. It was one of the first things that was brought to my attention literally within a week of living here, because I started working very near the shell mounds in the San Francisco Bay. And but by making this land acknowledgement, I feel like we are, saying that among other things, that we've been taught our history very badly. We've often been complicit in perpetuating myths and lies about that history was, how historical events were enacted and how they're remembered and repeated and taught and carried among the people who were the settlers, the colonial settlers, um, you know, the invaders of this place. So I also want to say that with this event in particular of thinking about this conjunction of poetry and environmental justice, I mean, nothing could be more appropriate than speaking to the original inhabitants of this land. And what I, always remember and repeat is that people were here at least 5,000 years in these spaces, and we have been here in just a matter of minutes, really, in comparison to that. And we all know the great amount of ruination that has happened in the short time of that occupancy of what we call North America, California, the San Francisco Bay Area. So tonight's event takes its name from a poem by the poet Linda Hogan, Indigenous poet. Her poem is named Map. And the final lines of that poem are these: "There are names each thing has for itself, and beneath us the other order already moves. It is burning, it is dreaming, it is waking up." So I want to also thank a number of our people who have helped make tonight's program possible. And so that would be the Paul Longmore Institute on Disability. Our friends Kathy Kudlick and Emily Bidings are co-sponsors for tonight's program and helped get the word out. Our ASL interpreters are Pilar and Odie, who are providing interpretation all through the evening. And live captioner is Tina. So thank you to all of you for making this event as accessible as we can. We want to thank the Poetry Coalition, which is an organization of poetry presenting groups from across the US. We have been convening for something like 7 years. And this year, each year we do a series of related programs across the country. And the theme this spring is poetry and environmental justice, with those lines from Linda Hogan: "It is burning, it is dreaming, it is waking up." Funding for this series of programs is from a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to the Academy of American Poets, and that's in support of Poetry Coalition programs. The sequence for tonight will have brief presentations by each of our poets, and then we will have everyone will join each other on stage, and we'll be able to converse. And there could be an opportunity for questions from the audience, and there's a Q&A box within the Zoom room, and some of you will know how to work that. And just put your questions for the writers in that box, and then if we have time permitting, we'll be able to respond to audience questions. Okay. At that, I'm going to introduce Eli Clare. And we're really grateful to have Eli here from in northern Vermont. White, disabled, and genderqueer, Eli Clare lives near Lake Champlain in occupied Abenaki territory, where he writes and proudly claims a penchant for rabble-rousing. He's written 2 books of creative nonfiction: the award-winning Brilliant Imperfection, Grappling with Cure, that Duke University Press brought out in 2017, and Exile and Pride, Disability, Queerness, and Liberation, also reprinted by Duke University Press in a new edition. And then a collection of poetry, which is called The Marrow's Telling, Words in Motion. And Eli has published in many periodicals and anthologies. He speaks, teaches, and facilitates disability, queer, and trans, or all over the United States, I'm sorry, and Canada at conferences, community events, and colleges about disability, queer and trans identities, and social justice. He's currently a University at Buffalo Center for Diversity Innovation Distinguished Visiting Scholar. Among other things, he has walked across the United States for peace. He's coordinated a rape prevention program and helped organize the first ever Queerness and Disability Conference. Please welcome Eli Clare.
It is my greatest pleasure to be here tonight. And I want to thank everyone who has made this event possible. So much labor. Just thank you. I'm going to be reading a handful of newish, unpublished poems. I want to start with a poem that thinks about blurring the boundaries between human and more than human, between human and the rest of the beings that live on this planet. Poem about a black bear, and thinking about what it means to become. So this is called Bear. 1. Become a black bear taking her morning bath, belly touching stream bed, water lifting fur. Begin to roll side to side, current trembles through your bulk. Become that motion, a body resisting gravity. She rises, belly wet, heaving, ambles downstream into the sun. Who belongs to whom? The aspen quiver. 2. Let her amble become yours. Just a single moment as you drop to all fours. Weight shifts, shoulder then hip, shoulder then hip. Pause, push into needles, spruce and larch, claws catch earth. And then you're simply human again, crawling on hands and knees, because your balance is so much better this close to ground. So when I think of environmental justice and poetry, I think of love, I think of rage, I think of grief, I think of connection. This next poem is about love and grief. It's called How to Love for the Long Haul. Become the honey-lit spruce of a fiddle singing, the seam of iron ore spun into a steel guitar. Fall, fall, fall in love often. Love, sugar maple, white pine, paper birch. Lean close, smell the rough and ruffled skin. Love cattail, creek, muddy bottom. Love super fun site, clear cut, quarry, third growth forest. Love the dirt beneath your feet, bat, bee, bear on the brink. Become those long soprano notes, gusting, as the wildfires burn. Feel your lungs strain, belly quiver. I know your heart will break, break, break again, tender and fierce as the earth herself. So next I'm going to read a series of 3 poems about tremors. As a disabled person, I live in a body that is always in motion with tremors, and I'm really aware of how tremors are hated, feared, stigmatized, stared at, ignored. And tremors have long been a theme in my poetry, and more recently I've been interested in moving out from my body into other bodies and thinking about where the motion of tremors exists in the planet herself. So 3 poems in this series, starting with the body of the planet, the geologic body. Tremors 1. We know how tectonic plates yearn for friction, heat, that long, jolting rub of rock against rock, and yet hold still till they can no longer bear the stillness. Dolomite scraping over shale, careen and shake, become glass flexing, plates rattling, walls cracking, become lurch, thrust, creak, a planet trembling on her axis. This next poem about tremors comes right into my body, my visceral experience of tremors, thinking about hatred and taunting. Tremors 2. Your hands and mine, strangers on the street, taunt, stare, turn away. Let us forget our manners, compliance, veneer of politeness. Teach each other to keen and rage. Call them out, strut and flirt, make them yearn, turn to look again, make them flee, make them remember their own tremoring hearts. So one last poem in the series about tremors, Tremors 3. Lean in, a bedrock of tremors, a dailiness of tremors, a gratitude of tremors, a river of tremors, a featherbed of tremors, a flock of tremors, a skittering at low tide, a pattern of pearl stitches, a drumming of woodpeckers, a low buzz of honeybees, songs that fill every chamber, subway tunnel, jackhammer, aftershock. And let me end again with grief. This is a poem that I started writing almost exactly a year ago. So in the midst of early pandemic, during the lockdown here in Vermont, and it's a poem I ended in late May, June, and July as the protests around George Floyd's murder were happening all over the world. And after my friend and fierce disability justice activist Stacey Park Milburn, after Stacey, who lived in Oakland had died. So all of that went into this poem, all of that and more, called Heartbreak. Heart of lake at flood level, heart of stone, heart of pine, heart of glacier collapsing, heart of spasm and stem, heart of river no longer reaching its estuary, heart of scientists working to create a vaccine for which the whole world is waiting, heart of hummingbird, hive, hay barn, heart of octopus and damselfly, heart of ER nurse after a 16-hour shift, heart of thunderhead, heart of apple tree, heart of janitor cleaning rooms of the newly dead, heart of queerness, heart of no justice, no peace, heart of rook and pawn placed on a chessboard, heart of falcon nesting atop a skyscraper, heart of tightrope walker at 2 a.m., heart of dance floor, disco ball, drag queen after one too many whiskey sours, heart of Black Lives Matter, heart of snake, mouse, owl, heart of bedrock, heart of treehouse, heart of grief, heart of jet stream, heart of moon, heart of sandhill crane, heart of rumble, heart of rage, heart of hallucination, heart of hardness, heart of slowness, heart of worry, heart of orgasm, heart of gasping for breath, heart of ventilator, heart quivering, heart stumbling, heart beginning to stop, beginning to break, beginning to rise. Thank you.
There, thank you. Thank you, Eli, very much. Very beautiful. And am I being heard now? Yes, great. Okay, I'd like to introduce Tiffany Higgins. And Tiffany is a 2022 Fulbright Scholar to Brazil's Amazon. So that's a year from now. She writes on Brazil and the environment, and as well as translating from Portuguese. She's the author of 2 collections of poems. And Aeneas Stares Into Her Helmet was selected by Evie Shockley as the winner of the 2008 Carolina Wren Press Poetry Prize. And the other book is a long poem chapbook called The Apparition at Fort Bragg. Her writing, poetry, literary translation, and journalism appear in Granta, Manga Bay, Poetry, and elsewhere. She was the 2020 Annie Clark Tanner Fellow in Environmental Humanities at the University of Utah. Let's welcome Tiffany Higgins.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm going to start by, I'm going to share my screen in just a little bit. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to participate. I want to first of all recognize, thank you for the beautiful land recognition, Steve. And I want to recognize that I'm speaking to you tonight from the ancestral lands of the Ohlone Chochenyu. And I also want to recognize that today is the 25-year anniversary of an important event in Brazil, which was the massacre in 1996 of 19 landless peasants in the El Dorado do Carajás massacre, and my colleagues are commemorating that in Brazil. I will want to introduce Marcia Cambeba, who I'm translating her poems of the Cambeba people. And I'll switch very quickly to share my screen and just, yeah, so do that. So I hope is my screen visible? I'm hoping. Nobody can tell me. I'm assuming it is. Okay, I'm just going to go on as if it is. Okay, so I'm going to present the expression of two Brazilian indigenous women. One is Marcia Waina Cambeba. Oops, I'm getting nervous that I'm not. I wonder if somebody can. I'm just not sure if I'm sharing. Can somebody chime in and tell me whether they can see my screen? Okay, thank you. That's all I needed. Okay. So Marcia Waina Cambeba has a master's in geography. She is of the Cambeba Omagua people, as she's going to explain. I'm going to show a video. She has a master's in geography. She's an adjunct professor, a performer, and a poet. I'm in the midst of translating two of her books. And one of the important points of context that she's going to discuss is, well, that's important to know for what she's about to say, there's an extreme rise in the last 2 years of land invasions on indigenous lands and on other protected lands. And at the same time, the agency in charge of running enforcement on that, their fines for that kind of thing have actually gone down in the last 2 years. So something's askew there. So it means there's a kind of impunity going on, and it's a lot because of the context of the current administration, the Bolsonaro administration. So something she's going to raise is the importance of that for indigenous peoples. In Brazil, she says, and she makes this motion that culture and nature are intertwined. And that's something that, you know, in the US environmental context, I think we've really struggled with. You know, there's been a romanticization of nature as its own thing. And that's really left the story of traditional peoples, for example, behind. And I think for me, that's the crux of, you know, one of the ways that I approach environmental justice is bringing those together.
Olá, sou Márcia Cambeba, sou do povo Omagua Cambeba.
Sorry, I didn't really introduce this. So she recorded this just for us today. So she begins, and I should, I'm trying to have you be able to see her speaking and also this translation that I did. So let's begin again. Oh, I don't really have to. Okay.
Olá, sou Márcia Cambeba, sou do povo Omagua Cambeba. Estou falando diretamente do estado do Pará, na Amazônia. Eu venho falar sobre as dificuldades que os povos originários, os povos indígenas, têm enfrentado ao longo desse tempo com relação à questão ambiental.
Okay, I think I figured out that you can't probably see the word, so I'm going to just read it. I'm Marcia Cambeba of the Cambeba Omagua people. I'm speaking directly from the state of Pará in the Amazon. I'm here to speak on the difficulties that the original native peoples, indigenous peoples have faced all along in relation to the environmental question.
Nós nos percebemos intrínsecos, ligados, não há separação entre povos originários e natureza.
We perceive ourselves as intrinsically tied together. There is no separation between native peoples and nature.
Somos a própria
We are nature
natureza.
itself.
E toda violência sofrida com relação à natureza afeta diretamente os nossos
And all the
territórios.
violence suffered in relation to nature directly affects our territories.
Hoje, nós sofremos com desmatamento, com aquecimento global. Nós sofremos com a invasão dos territórios. O Covid-19 também veio reduzindo e dizimando muitos dos nossos.
And all the violence suffered in relation to nature directly affects our territories. Today, we are suffering deforestation, global warming. We are suffering invasions of our territories. COVID-19 also came, reducing and decimating many of us.
A dificuldade é grande com relação a manter os nossos territórios, as nossas árvores, os nossos rios limpos, as nossas árvores em pé, a nossa terra sem ser fatiada.
The difficulty is huge in relation to maintaining our territories, our trees, to keep our rivers clean, to keep our trees standing, to keep our lands from being sliced up or divided by boundaries.
Fatiada e dividida por fronteiras. Então nós queremos e lutamos pelos nossos territórios.
And so we we want and we struggle for our territories.
Demarcação
So this is a very
já.
important phrase. Demarcação já is a kind of slogan. It means demarcation of our lands now.
Demarcação às nossas terras. Queremos e precisamos dessa terra para viver a nossa territorialidade, ensinando os nossos filhos e filhas, futuras gerações, a aprender com a natureza, a ser natureza.
Demarcation of our lands is what we demand. We want and need our lands in order to live our territoriality so that our children of future generations will be able to learn with nature. And she has a little sign off thanking us, but I think I'll pause there and point out this concept of territoriality is so key, because rather than having nature as a kind of pure, land without people, territoriality is about how their culture is woven into nature. They're not separate. So I'm going to go on from there, and I'm going to keep her image up there, and I'm just going to go on and read some poems by her. And I'm going to just read so you can hear the Portuguese a little bit just at the beginning. So this is called Green World. Verte mundo, não pense que invadi seu habitat, que cheguei sem avisar, e que vim para incomodar por não ser igual a você. Green World, don't imagine I invaded your quarters, arrived without warning, came to bother you by not being your equal. No, I'm the daughter of the forest. I arrived early to this celebration of enchantment and love. And you, sir? You entered the auditorium, setting the orchestra out of tune. You broke the gourd of the maracá, made the sugar plantation and cachaça, brought the flu and so much evil. You messed with the color of the universe. Even the climate altered. And progress? I only know I always return to my green world. And of course, the slogan on the Brazilian flag is order and progress. So she's kind of, referring to that. And Indigenous peoples, especially in the last 2 years, are often framed as obstacles to progress. And that gives the justification for kind of land invasions and a upcoming bill in the Congress that would allow mining on Indigenous lands. And that would have grave consequences. So I'm going to read a poem about the rivers. Often we think of the Amazon and we think of the trees, but I really love thinking about the rivers, and Marcia does as well. This is called The Floating People. Povo flutuante. Nas margens do rio vivem os povos das águas, a vida com desafio. Acordam com a natureza ao som de aves, assobios. The floating people. Along the margins of the river live the peoples of the water. Each challenge makes them strong. They awaken to nature, whistles and bird song. The road echoes with rowing. Transport slides by. Canoe, paddle, wet street. In the boy's hand, the wisdom of a day's journey. To float, the wooden house needs the trunk of the asaku tree. Sways sweetly with the river, and from the window, a girl feeds the piraraku, which is a kind of fish. Children learn early on to trust in the one who is witness to their birth, play without fear in the darkness of the waters, dive without haste into the river that washes the body, protects their worth. The floating life, claiming place as its territory, sees in the river sustenance and dwelling, friend, father, and companion on the path. So there's one poem I wrote to you from her. She writes a lot about Indigenous rights, but I want to kind of, in the same time, switch now and discuss Bel Joruna of the Joruna people. My screen sharing is paused, it says. Oh, I have to do a new share. Okay, let me try that. Sorry, just a minute. Okay. Okay, so this is a little clip of a movie that I worked with the Manga Bay site's editor to make. And the context is you're looking at the Shingu River. I hope you're looking at that. Are you looking at that? I am screen sharing. Okay. The Joruna of the Joruna people is going to show us the Shingu River. There was just implemented a plan, a long-standing plan from the Belamanchi Dam Company, which is called Norte Energia, to divert the Shingu River by more than 70% over the course of the coming year, which will, unfortunately, scientists told me, and this is my hat as a reporter, lead to the death of at least 70% of the fish on this area that you're looking at. That is called the Volta Grande, or the Big Bend of the Shingu River. And it's a 130-kilometer section of the river where they are diverting it to the turbines. This is being done during the middle of what's called the piracema, which is from the Tupi words. It means the fish's departure. When the fish reproduce, they migrate from the main stem of the Shingu River into the annually flooded forest to spawn and raise their young. But if the flows aren't sufficient, which now they aren't because the company cut them, that they can't access the very fruits in the forest they need to give them the extra calorie boost to spawn. And of course, this affects the fisher folk because it's killing the basis of their food and their culture. And she's going to show us that immediately there was a kind of immediate effect. You're going to see plants that she points out, and she says these should be below water. And this is just the beginning of the diversion that's happened in February.
Elas alagam no inverno. Então, é o que mantém elas. Mas como não vai ter mais água para alagar elas, elas vão morrer. Quando o nível de água está normal, isso aqui ninguém nem vê. Ela fica toda no fundo. Aquelas ali também das margens também. A gente não vê não, vai tudo pro fundo. Aquela daí ali mais adiante também. Elas são árvores da água. E como agora não vai chegar mais água, elas vão morrer. Então a Volta Grande vai se tornar um cemitério. Vai ser um cemitério de peixes, cemitério de árvores mortas, né? E a gente vai estar aqui e a gente quer resistir neste lugar, né? Lutando para que a gente possa também não virar um cemitério também dentro da aldeia.
Okay, and so I'm going to just stay on that screen and I'm going to read, I'm going to go back, and I did some interviewing with Belle before this has happened in October 2020, but it was kind of, you could see that it was possibly going to happen. Norte Energy was trying to implement this super low hydrogram, sucking up, more than 70% of the water. And so this is what she sent me some audio. This is what she said. They diverted the river and it still isn't sufficient for them. We are already experiencing many negative consequences of diverting the river. It's already a very drastic change in our environment, in our ecosystem here. And so this, when she's talking about this plan, will be a total extermination of the Volta Grande. She uses this phrase, un exterminio total. And she says the water table will go down too, in terms of because they've been trying to, because they don't have the fish, because the fish have been dying off because of the dam, even before this drastic hydrogram, it's called, drawing down of the river. They've been trying to grow crops to substitute their diet. Most of their diet is fish. And so if the water table goes down, then that affects their hosta, they call it, which are these little plots of land where they've been growing vegetables. And they're not right by the river necessarily. So that means, carting water a really long way. But when the water level goes down, then you don't actually want to be carting water from the water, becomes very poor quality. It has like algae blooms and stuff, and you don't really want to be putting that onto your crops. But then the well levels go down as well. So there's all these compounded problems. So she says the water table will go down too. She uses this kind of beautiful word in Portuguese, which is lençol de água, means kind of sheet water. Our planting spots with which we're trying to adapt our way of living, you see, because of the company diverting the river, taking our source of income, our food, we were trying to adapt with some plantings. These also will die because the water sheet will lower. It's reprehensible, the situation. How is it that once again, Norte Energy is taking a decision without consulting the indigenous peoples, without consulting the Ribeirinhos either, which are the traditional fisher folk that aren't necessarily just indigenous, but they live on the Volta Grande too. Because this is our duty. Porque as plantas não têm como falar. Because the plants don't have a way to speak. Os peixes não têm como falar. The fish don't have a way to speak. A água não tem como falar. The water doesn't have a way to speak. Mas nós podemos falar por eles, but we can speak for them. Quem pode falar para as plantas, para os peixes, para os animais que aqui tem em nós, pessoas humanas que moram na região. The ones who can speak for the plants, for the fish, for the animals that we have here, are we ourselves, the human people who live in the region. E nós queremos ser consultados, and we want to be consulted. This is actually the law that by ILO 169, International Convention, they must be consulted about any decision to affect them as indigenous or traditional peoples. And this should have happened. This is the law, and Brazil ratifies this as national law as well as international, and it should have happened, but it never happened even before 2009 when the license was given for the stamp. So she's a decade later, she and the Jordana people are still demanding consultation. Consultado de qualquer decisão, não se pode derrubar uma ação deste nível sem consultar nós. Consulted on any decision, you can't strike down an action of this level without consulting us. É uma violação de direitos. It's a violation of human rights, you see. It's an extermination of the Volta Grande with this attitude of the company once more. And then she ends saying, it's not enough for them that they diverted the river. Now they want to diminish, grab all our water and take it to the turbines, and it still won't be enough. And her voice trails off. And I will kind of pause, wrap up there. I just want to note that the people defending, to defend nature, therefore, is to defend indigenous rights and traditional people's rights. There is an upcoming discussion happening. Bolsonaro and Biden were doing kind of closed door discussions. It came out just this past week about a kind of climate forest deal. And I would encourage you to kind of check out and, find out what's happening, maybe write your congressperson if that kind of thing is interesting to you. to see how Indigenous peoples are being integrated into those discussions. And a good organization to follow is APIB, APIB, APIB. You can see their feed here. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tiffany. Yes, indeed, you know, the depredations just absolutely are continuing on so many levels and in places. And thank you for doing that work and bringing that work that is otherwise inaccessible to us. The gift of translation. I am going to introduce Ed Roberson. And I was recalling yesterday that Ed was one of the very first people that I believe I was able to invite to read for the Poetry Center. That was way back in the year 2000, it seems, and it's hard to believe that was 21 years ago. Ed is the author of many books. The book that came out 10 years ago that the title was so striking to me and others, it is To See the Earth Before the End of the World. The opening line is of the first poem is, people are grabbing at the chance to see the earth before the end of the world. And this book that is newly out, I'm feeling that it is a kind of extension of that earlier work, and that the title of this book is Asked What Has Changed. That they're both from Wesleyan University Press. Asked What Has Changed has just come out. There's a book forthcoming from Verge Books later this year, and that is called MPH and Other Road Poems. Ed was at Rutgers University as a special programs administrator, though he's lived in Chicago since 2004. He's now emeritus professor at Northwestern from their MFA creative writing program. He's taught at numerous universities. He received the Jackson Poetry Prize, the Shelley Memorial Award, the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, and others, the African American Literature and Cultural Association Stephen Henderson Critics Award. That's a big prize in that field. He was born and raised in Pittsburgh. Ed Roberson has worked as a limnologist's assistant, conducting research on inland and coastal freshwater systems in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, and also in Bermuda. And he's worked as a diver for the Pittsburgh Aqua Zoo. He's worked in an advertising graphics agency and also in the Pittsburgh steel mills. Let's welcome Ed Roberson. There.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very glad to be here. I'm coming from, I'm living in Chicago, so I'm podcasting from Chicago. And Chicago is located on the ancestral lands of the Council of Three Fires. It's comprised by the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi Nation, as well as the Miami, Menominee, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations. I'd like to read the opening couple of poems from the new book, Ask What Has Changed. The title of the book, title poem, comes from a questionnaire that was given to me by an editor who was putting together a what was at the time called an anthology for eco poetry. And the question was, in the light of the devastation, what has changed in your art? What has changed for you? And everything. Ask what has changed. Even staring out the window has changed. The private peak above it all brought down with the erosion of the poise between the viewable and the mused unseen. Dissolution, so nearly changeless as not to appear, is shifting the sands inside from what we watched. No more the steady stage, the self-dramatic days play out on outside. The silent portent now allowed alert to things changing, the light, a darkness, not the normal individual mortality, but as if the epical heartbeat of larger elements, the seas, the air, had mutated, become chimera, grown wing, and routed ancestral time. Even staring out the window, the timeless is gone. We see coming in the daily migration of the local geese to the lake at evening, the cities pull up and move in unlike consternation towards and away from the water that had been so calming to gaze out on, to live by, easy to not live according to. And now that seas are adding themselves into the land, horizons look ominously larger. They are even out of them faster and clearer. Now you see the view is turned on us to frame human agency, become transparent. Light is there before the picture blackens as a consequence of our seeing too much of it as only for us to use and then use up. The eye is not filled with seeing, with only seeing, but with understanding the sight. Um, I live in a high rise right on the lake, and I see water all day, and the sky above the water. Um, this poem begins the opening of the book. This poem's called A Drop of Water. From the window, the surfaces of the puddles say it's raining. You can't see it falling in the street lights or the darkened windshield wipers smoothing it away. The silver of wetness has been steady for days. Crow's feathers have been the light composition of the streets. Unfazed, they eat and don't fly away at the light, exposing their dark plate until the last minute, not to become timeless themselves. They are the droplets of lightning that return upward, screaming at the disturbance, jumping up and down on the surface of everything that matters, troubling the structure of even the structureless water. Water, water. So it is water, not rain. Though it only changes its name, even though it clearly says trouble. I don't know what it is I'm seeing. I'm seeing my liquid body, water in a flesh glass, on the dining car table as the train crosses the track change. The surface of the water appears as ripples untouched by any stone, oscillating in place. Or as when my friend quietly says that's an aftershock. Or what I've heard that music sets up off the walls of our body, structures that hang in our blood and show that standing at a bus stop, when not the one I want rumbles through the potholes, I can feel my body floating up and down and know that there's nothing under my feet but another street I can't see. The engineering translates the suspension to me. What reception is triggered by this signal? I don't know what I am yet making of what is called troubling. 3. What is called troubling? The water. What has changed from glancing out at the weather to the unrevealed information held in a pointless flux of water, raising something in me, a back jet, a levitating globule, is a deepening in everything I want to know. The larger networks of answers ripple, flowering, the trees, the loam, they're loomed from the earth that pops free of its drop, as itself a moment for a glimpse before resolution back into the pool. The idea being that if our reality is holographic, that bubble, blanket tossed up above the ripple circle, is us, where on it I am following these images the same way to hear, resolved into a juggling fool whose water oranges round up one morning come off the horizon of the lake as sun. Four, the wind making the surface ripples on the pool at Bethesda is said to be the voice of God passing. Get its attention, ask a question. It's not certain what happens. It's not certain with anything that happens, what actually did. If some exactitude was even agent, or those dice the brain said didn't exist, did, those ripples, the drops crown on acceptance, an ebullient earth leapt up, whether to look around about or a rebellion free in a violent moment. One morning you will recognize the sun, a face that has no assurance, you see, on it, that it sees anything, especially none pertaining to you. That answer, that the sun comes up tomorrow, that answer doesn't even take your question. A few poems later in the sequence that opens the book, there's a poem called "The Street Knows It's Changed." The street knows it's changed its direction. Once it was here, now it's the way to someplace else. Benches have been waiting to catch the little talk that got off and gathered at that corner. Now there's standing time for as little the mobile app schedules tolerate safety, limiting arrival to one, if any, anticipatory glance down the road except for what's late. As little weather to wait with as neighbor, known by name. The temperatures, all strangers to this time of year here. Now is known to be looking elsewhere. The next poem is Speculation, and it's modeled after Blake's Tiger, Tiger. What comes after the ocean where it is? What will move in? What kind of neighborhood will it bring? What is that familiar horizon packing up, selling off, or getting rid of we don't see out on the curb? And what can it not pull out and have to leave in place in the sky? What if nothing moves in after the ocean? What will that absentee prophets crackheads look like? What will they do to get it? What will there be to be got if, oh no? What will there be to be beget? Who can hold on to lifeless property? And how be that rich for millennia? Where will the artsy gentrifiers come from? Who can pay these prices? Last one. Last poem is called The Corner Unit. The corner unit over and down into the lake of the apartments in the building is in both the lake and the land, worlds as well as up in the sky. The heavy liners of the scheduled geese in there straight away, and the crazy swallows, the gulls' white ballet. From the balcony, this is city living at its most ethereal. East across the water and north across the residential roofs and trees into the line of skyscraper cliffs. The toes of the clouds hang down, rain shafts, the earth sucks up in a dance. The river's orgasmic unraveling. Roots fly up and curl around a harvest flushed across the skin of the fields. The roots of migration, following the woman who is food, the river goddesses spread it around and trade rosette knots in their pubic hairs, lines in the geologies of cultural epic. From the mortal earthly rail, the stop closest to Riverwalk, somewhere out there. What is city living? From the most mortal and earthly where is that view taken from? Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Just wonderful to hear that new work. Beautiful. I'm sorry. Thank you, Ed. Just wonderful to hear that new work. Very moving, beautiful. I'm going to introduce next Lehua Taitano. Lehua is a queer Chamorro writer and interdisciplinary artist from Yigu, Guahan, which we know as Guam, that island in the Pacific. She's co-founder of Art 25, Art in the 25th Century, and author of two full volumes of poetry, most recently Inside Me an Island, and prior to that, A Bell Made of Stones. And her chapbook, Appalachia Pacific, is fiction. It won the Merriam Frontier Award for short fiction. And she has two recent chapbooks of poetry and visual art. They are called Sonoma and Capacity. Her poetry and essays and pushcart nominated fiction have been published internationally. She won the 2019 Eliza So Fellowship and the 2019 Summer Poet in Residence at the Poetry Center at the University of Arizona, another Poetry Coalition member. She is has been featured literary artist via the Kearney Street Workshop here in San Francisco. She was part of a program that the Poetry Center here sponsored a number of years ago called the Cuentohan series, and with Barbara Jane Reyes and others. And Lehua has been a culture lab visual artist and curatorial advisor for the Smithsonian Institute's Asian Pacific American Center. Taitano's work investigates modern indigeneity, decolonization, and cultural identity in the context of diaspora. Maybe this past winter, if you walked by Yerba Buena Center Garden, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, their outdoor windows were displaying the project Future Ancestors, called Future Ancestors, made by Art 25 in collaboration with Jocelyn Campo Melani Ing. And that piece in the windows was called Afterlife, We Survive, photo piece. Let's welcome Lehua Taitano.
Hafa day, San Buenas. Hi, everyone. My name is Lehua, and I am the granddaughter of Maria Flores Taitano and the daughter of Catherine Taitano. I am coming to you from Pomo and Miwok lands in what is called Santa Rosa, California. Today, I'm going to be reading an essay that I wrote for a Pacific anthology on pedagogy and the environment. And I just want to draw your attention to the flowers in the screen behind me. That is the subject of this essay. And the wisteria that I reference is in fact this wisteria. I took this picture 2 days ago. She's in full bloom. This is called The Language of Recognition, One Indigenous Approach to Pedagogy. I am in love with a wisteria. I say wisteria because it is what I know to say that can conjure an image for some of you, though the truth takes much more to get to. Besides, the truest names of things often vine toward and away from us, spiraling against a backdrop of cloud-scattered sky. In this case, etymology only gets us so far, thanks to the taxonomic practices of Thomas Nuttall and the like. And here is a footnote. In his Genera of North American Plants and a catalog of the species, botanist Thomas Nuttall named the plant after a colleague, Caspar Wister, in 1817, which is how we have the current name wisteria. The first names of wisteria are not now commonly used, which is to say they are alive but held close to the hearts of those who keep and honor such things, despite attempted erasures and the violence of colonial self-importance. For my purposes here then, I will call upon what I know of true naming in order to bring the life of this sweet flowering vine into your consciousness so that we might delight in some of her ways. We'll call her Delight for a start, a proud bearer of draping scent. And what of her many arms, weighted in spring with clustering possibility? Do we know how to name a twining heart, clambering for recognition, for the right slant of light? I do know this. I am transplanted again and again. My roots air clung during each migration, remembering the many names I have for home. And in every garden, delight. I begin in the earth and twist toward the sun, that ancestral warmth, an orb of pulsing vision. Like wisteria, with wisteria, we are hand in hand, spiraling. In some lifetimes, at least, I am avian. Once a pelican, eyes drinking the glittering sea, my throat a pocket of foam and flotsam. I glide through keyhole arches, tuck my knees and skim the salt mist of rolling waves, wings glazed in orange sunset. In another, I'm a flitting bowerbird, an architect of tending. I gather neat geometries and moments of color, arranging patterns in the name of love and order. I preen and post my signs, then wait. In this, I am most patient, tasting small breezes for the tenderest of movements. We are speaking of the language of recognition. To enact those memories in this life, I create, dream, create again, past, present, future, all emanating from spiralized time, from and to, yes, but throughout all, part of, an indigenous sensibility, a Chamorro sensibility. We are speaking of the language of beginnings. In this life, I'm just as interested in curating spaces, tending, stretching outside perceived boundaries and the imposition of borders. In this life, I am a facilitator, teacher, an eternal student of beginnings. I bring with me in all spaces what I am part of, a host of educators and mentors, sky and ocean, currents and decay, my ancestral knowledge, imagination and intuition, all teachers, in classrooms, institutional, virtual, communal, and personal. I look to the beginnings of things in order to get to the roots of our relationships, our collective growing, and in all beginnings, indigeneity. Recently, in this unfolding era of the new pandemic, I was asked to speak to a class at Tufts University, Indigenous Literature and Culture. At 10 a.m. and simultaneously 1 p.m., we gather on two coasts in our own living rooms where most of us are visitors on native land. Between us and connecting us all, screens and digital transmissions, students dutifully come prepared with the language of critical discourse to speak about the American settler colonial project, genuine in their desire to understand the evolution of current socio-political systems and their accompaniments of destruction and obvious imbalance and injustice. And from that condition of turmoil, the inevitable question arises, just what exactly are we supposed to do about it? As for my part, as visiting artist, I was asked to share my writing, art, and perspectives on what I think there is to be had during these ever fearful times in which sovereignty and the basic human right of self-determination in Indigenous communities can seem to some discouragingly improbable. How do we not just survive, but thrive in systems of extent colonial oppression and ownership, wherein responsibility to our homelands and its stewardship contend with governmental restrictions to basic land access and cultural autonomy? So I asked the students in turn, what does being Indigenous really mean? What does education look like when we honor and acknowledge the Indigenous before all else? This time last year, I was in Boulder, Colorado, visiting a friend and colleague, Tierra Napati. I facilitated an interdisciplinary workshop she proposed in order to highlight more Pacific Islander voices at the CU Boulder campus. I organized a screening of my short film, Current I, and led a workshop based on an art installation I created with longtime collaborator Lisa Jarrett, titled The Unburdened Project. Both works are heavily concerned with exploring creative ecologies, and inherent to both are these core questions of indigeneity. Current I is a crudely cinematic, yet lushly sensory engagement with land and water, as the visual poem questions the nature of our body's basic parts, water, electricity, and how those elements activate our relational awareness to all living things, including the cosmos and the planet itself. While the Unburdened Project asks participants to actively engage with and contribute to the literal ecology of my home garden, a space I cultivate as a visitor on Indigenous Miwok and Pomo lands. While the film for the audience is perhaps an exercise in glimpsing my own understanding of ecological relationships and responsibilities, the interactive nature of the Unburdened Project requires more direct action from the same audience, both physically and emotionally. The experience begins with an invitation to plunge one's hand into a bowl of soil that I have just shoveled from the ground outside the meeting space in which we are convening. As participants pass the bowl around the room, sifting the soil with their fingers, I ask them to consider what impact this action might have on our minds and bodies, noting that we are inside walls made of concrete, steel, and glass, spaces made to keep nature outside. I then ask them rather bluntly to think about a secret that they have been harboring, one that has had a negative effect on their lives. I do not ask participants to tell me or anybody the secret. Rather, I invite them to write it down on a slip of rice paper I have provided, which they can then crumple and deposit into the bowl of soil anytime during the workshop. I ask participants to trust me. I ask them to trust themselves. I encourage them to imagine, to think of the earth and growing plants as an intuitive way of healing. I ask them to consider whether the power of the earth and growing things can transform something as powerful as shame within us, should we choose to make ceremony around its release. I ask them, what does being Indigenous really mean? What does education look like when we honor and acknowledge the Indigenous before all else? What will happen is this. Someone will ask me what the point of it all is. Someone will ask me whether I really believe this will make any difference at all. I will talk about ways of knowing. I will talk about what my ancestors have passed to me, regardless of what violence and incursions and systems of oppression have tried to undermine. I will speak about the differences in decolonizing and re-indigenizing. Then, I will take the crumbled bits of rice paper home with me. I will treat them as if they are the secrets themselves. I will not read them. I will close my eyes and say words in my native language that conjure notions of release, peace, and transformation. I will compost the secrets in my garden, turn them over with worm castings and manure and the earth who is already there, awaiting our attention. In the space I have prepared, I will sow vegetable seeds. All the while, the wisteria will wend and coil ever nearer to the chicken coop. The chickens will scratch beneath the fig tree, bathing in dust and dappled sun. At least 4 crows will chase the fledgling hawk from the redwood. The slugs will meet in their meeting places and circle each other in an old, old dance of impetuous necessity and longing. The ocean breeze will make its way through the fields of mustard and red-winged blackbirds and bend the radish blossoms to the earth. I will quiet myself and try to slip seamlessly into the pace of the living earth. I will make the patterns of sky and water and plants my patterns. When the cabbages or the cucumbers or the peppers are harvested, I will spiral into and out of this long ceremony by closing my eyes and thinking of all who made themselves vulnerable in the community we created one day, for a few moments, with secrets and the hope for our transformation. I will take slow bites. I will watch as the day turns to dusk, as blossoms fold into pods of seeds. I will say prayers of gratitude and ask the earth to please keep speaking, to please keep teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Lehua. Really wonderful. And I'd like to invite all the poets back on screen now. And we have a short time for a conversation. And so once again, we would ask for, if there are questions, there's a question and answer box down at the bottom right of your screen that you can use. And I'm going to make my screen a little larger so I can see everyone. And if we could get the poets all unmuted. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was such a remarkable way to bring things around, because it was my sense we started with Eli talking about the kind of necessity of lowering the boundaries between the human and what is other than human, and then Lehua coming to this notion of, what is something like education if we honor and acknowledge the indigenous before all else, and that phrase of spiralized time is really wonderful, remarkable way of stating a perception of time. And I noted Ed's statement on that, to me very much rhymed with some of what Marcia Cambeba was saying in Brazil, when Ed in his poem, even staring out the window, the timeless is gone. And Marcia Cambeba saying, you messed with the color of the universe, and so I think, given that we just have a brief time, I'd like to know if the poets have like questions for one another out of this listening and briefly being together. And again, I've stated amongst ourselves privately that we're in a room full of strangers, in a sense that most of us have not met one another before. So would any of you have any questions that you'd like to pose to one another?
I'm going to offer the dreaded, I have a comment instead of a question. But it is appropriate here. I really, to speak to what you're asking about, Steve, I really enjoy getting to know people in this way, of getting to know folks through their activism and their passion. And I really appreciate meeting you all here in this format, because we get to the quick of things about each other. So it's a pleasure to be in your company. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Lehua, the idea of making rituals that come from deeply within inside yourself, whether they're handed down or whether they come through dreams or just how you feel, but to make of it a ritual that includes other people, I think is a really beautiful thing to do.
Thank you.
I really appreciated those images. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It is, it's something that gives me the opportunity to give myself authority, and I really appreciate your interest in that. Thank you.
Very nice.
If you want to send me your secrets, I'll care for them, and I'll send you the frozen kale that probably will come of it.
I love it. I love kale.
Great.
Well, there were some kind of I don't know, preparatory thoughts and that went out prior to this event on tonight, and I feel a little bit like what I've been trying to do is just to give an attentive listening to what each person is bringing, and to recognize a kind of difference at the same time as a complementarity, that there are radical differences between the perspectives and knowledge and experience that each of you bring, and at the same time there's a way in which this difference is not an opposition. It's working together, maybe in that kind of spiraling time. And but something that Eli had said right at near the beginning as well was that, like I believe it was when I consider the notion of environmental justice, I feel love, rage, grief, and connection. And these four, I want to, maybe, I guess the question I put is like, why do we always within Western, ontologies or whatever, put these things in opposition so that they cancel each other out, like love and rage are something like, at mutual ends of one another. Grief and connection are almost, separated by the traditional ways of confining emotions and such. And I don't know, Eli, it was beautiful to me that these things were brought together as a complex that is invoked by the notion of environmental justice. Would you want to respond to that?
But they're not. They're a tangle. They go together. They fluctuate. One will come high and another will come lower. Two will crash, or two will kiss, or like my life is full of all four in ways that often are not differentiated. And often when I can sit with beings that are not human, rocks or trees, when I hear the white pines talking to me, when I can get quiet enough so the white pines actually have things to say to me. Love is not separate from rage, is not separate from grief, is not separate from connection. And I love the story of being in love with Wisteria. We so want to privilege a kind of love between humans and white thought. And I love the, no, I'm in love with Wisteria, like this sense of connection between beings, not even using the taxonomy of species. And for me, that love is full of a lot of things, certainly joy, certainly longing, certainly yearning, but also rage and grief.
Is this connected to that question that you have of what is it to become?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, for acknowledging that. Yeah. Well, we unfortunately have exhausted our time here, and so we've had remarkably rich presentations by each of you, and again I'm incredibly grateful to you for accepting the invitation to be here together. I wish that we had a tomorrow scheduled where we could come back and really talk to one another, and we'll have to put that into a different kind of manner of thinking and writing and correspondence and so forth. Thank you to our audience and for everybody else. I want to remind people of an event that we have upcoming on April 29th. Tongo Eisen Martin and a woman named Ellie Jones have started a new press. It's one of the really beautiful things to come out of recent developments in the poetry world here in the Bay Area. And Tongo has become the poet laureate of San Francisco and is giving an address on April 21st. And he's going to do it as a collective address with friends and family involved, you know, rather than I, the poet laureate, standing up and laying down the word. So on the 29th, we're doing a celebration of that press. Mahogany Brown, Christopher Malik, Josiah, Luis Alderete, and Tonga will be reading the last work of the poet Q.R. Hand, who died on New Year's Eve this past year. And so please, if you can, join us on the 29th, 7 p.m. That's a Thursday night. And thank you to Tiffany Higgins, Lehua Taitano, Eli Clare, and Ed Roberson for sharing your wealth and wisdom and words with us today. So grateful to all of you, and best wishes. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Saina Maasi.